Hello again. It is, I suppose, very wrong and ill-natured of me, but I've been deriving a great deal of amusement from looking through a publication entitled Decolonising the Curriculum, a guide for APS, which has apparently been produced by a team of lunatics at Sheffield University. APS stands for Animal and Plant Sciences, and why they can't just say biology and botany, I could not say. Perhaps those terms themselves are tainted with colonialism. I give a link to this extraordinary document in the description to this video. There are so many things one might say about this handbook, but I shall begin with two preliminary observations. One is the sheer and abysmal ignorance of those who wrote it, and the other is the peculiar language in which the thing is couched. If we open the document and turn to page 17, the one headed Evolution and Genetics, you will see what I mean. We read the following. Many prominent evolutionary biologists and geneticists to help establish the field were racists and eugenicists, including J.B.S. Haldane, Francis Galton, James Crick, and many more. Just savour this for a moment. Sooner or later someone will spot this and Sheffield University will pull the thing in horror. But just for a moment, savour it. The structure of DNA was established in the 1950s, but even now, almost 70 years later, every educated person in the world knows the names of Francis Crick and James Watson, the men who worked out the structure of the double helix. Even I know the names, and science is definitely not my field. And yet we find that the biology department of a leading British university, a member of the Russell Group, does not know their names. They are so unfamiliar with the history of science that not one person, either writing, editing, proofreading or publishing this thing, noticed that the name was muddled up. They've never heard of Francis Crick. This tells me all I need to know about the clowns who knocked this thing out. Almost as bad is the incomprehensible language in which it is written. I spoke a few days ago about the way that clever people seem unable to speak or write like the rest of us. I gather from the comments that I'm not alone in noticing this. Here are some priceless examples of this tendency. Turning to page 5, we find that it is headed, "What will decolonising the curriculum involved?" I'm glad they asked that question because I was a little bit puzzled myself about decolonising science. I find, reading the text, that it entails empowering students and staff to understand their own positionality, the social and political context that shapes your views, actions and biases, and reflect on their science through a critical decolonial lens. Positionality. This is different from just an ordinary position. Why has somebody gone to all the trouble of adding 3 syllables to the word position in this way? If I simply say empowering students and staff to understand their own position, it means exactly the same as positionality. Much of the handbook is written in this same jargon. It is word salad, thrown together by using long, grand words and phrases which conceal rather than reveal the meaning. Like this passage on page 15, for instance. Embedding true collaboration into applied science from its inception has myriad benefits, gaining alternative perspectives on need, diversifying our knowledge by integrating non-academic knowledge, and improving the relationship between scientists and stakeholders. It's just waffle, but beautifully put together. Using a word like myriad instead of just saying many makes it sound clever and thoughtful. I draw your attention to the idea of diversifying our knowledge by integrating non-academic knowledge. What that means is listening to people that aren't scientists and trying to take on board their views about science and genetics and so on. The general gist of the thing, for those who cannot bear to plough through this dribble, and who can blame them, is that science should not be objective, and that it should be a political and cultural enterprise rather than merely a quest for knowledge and understanding. We must not give more weight when considering somebody's opinion merely whether or not that person is a professor at an important university. On page 19 we find that we should value diversity in epistemology by realising that science stems from a Western positivist perspective, which is just one of many equally valid ways of understanding the world and addressing contemporary problems. This is an assault on the scientific method itself by indicating that science is itself racist and that we should not value one view over another. In other words, our reliance on scientific method is upholding the comfortable myth of true objectivity in science prevents us from working to mitigate our own biases and question those of others. Confronting the historical roles of European science in racism and the injustices of colonialism, and how modern science perpetuates these injustices. Acknowledging that the science we teach is white and takes a Eurocentric viewpoint, explaining where that comes from and what problems it creates. This means, in simple language, that instead of placing more weight on what a professor of genetics at Harvard says, we should also listen to the opinions of Kalahari Bushmen and Australian Aborigines. People like Charles Darwin are regarded as dangerous racists, partly because he is seen as a white saviour, apparently. The expression white saviour is used in the thing. I've never heard anybody use it in connection with scientists before, but there we are. I have heard something of the origin of this view about Charles Darwin, by the way, from someone that I know at UCL, University College London. This is becoming a thing that's being spread around amongst ignorant students, people that have never actually learned anything apart from what they've been taught at school. It's driven by a piece of nonsense about the title of The Origin of Species, which most of them have never read. The actual title of The Origin of Species reads as follows: On the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favoured races in the struggle for life. Favoured races. Whoa, right there you could see the guy's racism. In fact, the expression races in the context of Victorian language has nothing to do with humans. There is no mention in that book at all of human races. When Origin of Species was written, races was simply another way of describing varieties or species of animals. But I am seeing reference to favoured species a lot, and that has inspired the attack on Darwin in that handbook from Sheffield. This handbook is part of an attack upon science itself, which comes ultimately from critical race theory. The Enlightenment and the scientific method are both seen as being the products of racism and white supremacists, and there is a feeling that science needs to be dismantled and rebuilt along cultural lines, taking feelings into account, and nationality and skin colour, rather than just a strict reliance on objective data. It will be interesting to see how that works out in the future.